The Battle of Isandlwana, the 22nd of January 1879, well covered on this channel. It was a brutal battle that saw over 1,000 British and colonial soldiers killed fighting against the Zulus. Amongst the units fighting for their life that day were 34 men of the Natal Mounted Police. The Natal Mounted Police, or the NMP as it's more commonly referred to, is a fascinating unit. It had a disproportionately large amount of former officers serving in its ranks, sons of generals and men of means. Cam Simpson, good friend of the show, has just finished writing a book about the unit called Blue Blood Troopers in Zululand. And he's joining me today to talk all about the unit and especially those interesting men who served in it. Before we begin the interview though, I just wanted to take a moment to let you know that both Cam and I will be in London later this month for the Clash of Empires exhibition that's taking place at the Royal Philatelic Society. It actually opens today, but most of the speakers will be there between the 12th and the 15th. Cam will be speaking about the NMP, but also about the Frontier Light Horse, and I'll be there filming a lot of it. So if you're available, get yourself tickets, go to cashofempires.org. Anyway, let's get back to today's interview with Cam. I started off by asking him when and why the NMP were formed.
In 1874, on the back of the Langalilla Bailey Rebellion, the Natal government realised that their local regiments that they had, small corps of, 50, 60 men, whilst they were ideal for like local operations in short periods of mobilizations, that wasn't the real answer to what they needed. So they decided that they would form what was to be known as the Natal Mounted Police, and it was going to number 55 men. I think it was 150 initially local native constables as well. And the idea was that that would be the response to any unrest uprising in the colony. It's a very small force because across the border, the Frontier Mounted Police at the time had 9 field troops and an artillery troop. It was up to 600 men. So who was going to head this up? There was a number of candidates in the colony at the time. Many former British Army officers would retire there and take up farming. One man that they identified quite quickly was Major George Dartnell. He was formerly of the 27th Inniskillings, a Canadian by birth. He'd been in the British Army for some years and retired in 1869 as a major. So his pedigree, as we said, Canadian by birth. He initially served with the 86th, which was the Royal County Down Regiment. He was in the Indian Mutiny. And as a young 19-year-old during the mutiny, turned 20 during it. He was a young subaltern. He was also the adjutant of the regiment. And in April 1858, he's in an attack and he's involved with quite a violent hand-to-hand fight. He received a gunshot wound and he was wounded 4 times with a sword. So he was recommended for a Victoria Cross but he ended up being mentioned in dispatches and was promoted to captain. He was considered a reliable, undoubtedly very brave young officer who later transferred into the 16th Regiment, which was the Bedfordshires. And then lastly, he joins the 27th Inniskillings, and he's in the Bhutan expedition, 1865. Then he retires out to Natal. So he's got a lot of experience. Then in 1874, he would have been about 36 years of age. He's still young. A lot of military experience about him, and they obviously thought he could organise. So he was the first man in through the door, and incidentally, although he was appointed the commandant of the NMP, they still referred to him as Major. He was just Major Dartnell. He had as a sergeant major a chap called William Steen. Steen was 32 years of age, a former troop sergeant major in the old Cape Mounted Rifles. This is the Imperial Regiment before it was disbanded. Very capable character. He later ended up becoming the adjutant of the regiment. And it's interesting that with Puffy Steen, Puffy was his nickname, when you're reading the police journals, right up into, the period of like the Union, they're always referring to great stories about Steen and getting through recruit training with him and to be getting a tick in the box by Steen. That's a rite of passage into the NMP. He was the gatekeeper of the quality, and Dartnell recognised him for that. So these initial recruits weren't really a success. At the original 55, there was a huge turnover rate. 20 of them have been dismissed for misconduct alone. And by the time of the Zulu War, there's only 9 of them, in actual fact, that are still in the NMP. So they changed their model. The media sort of get hold of the issues in the NMP, and they felt it was, quite a poor show. So they start to recruit in England, and they bring out drafts. And this is when they, the title of my book, Blue Blood Troopers in Zululand, this is when they start to bring out men that are from this emerging middle class that's, spurred on by the Industrial Revolution, this emerging middle class there, and some upper class as well, some former British soldiers and officers joined as troopers. So they get a better quality of man coming in, and they come out, they sign up for 3 years. So the desertions stop, but they're still there because the big problem is the diamond fields.
Up at Kimberley.
Huge lure. And this was a problem for the British Army as well. So getting to the time of the Zulu War, or in the Zulu War, just so you get an idea of the number of men we're talking about, I've tracked down 271 Europeans and 17 native constables that served in the police during the war. The native constables will be way more, but the records just haven't survived in the archives. So when the Zulu War kicks off, Dartnell at that time, he's got 4 European officers. He's got 174 NCOs and men available to him. And the statistics say that there were 55 natives, but as far as identifying names, I could only get a fraction of that. To get an idea, before I get onto some of the operations, more about the men themselves, just so we can build up this picture in our mind of what these men, the backgrounds they come from. So of this 270, 155 have been born in England, 18 were Irish. There were 18 that have been born in India. 11 were only born in South Africa. There was almost a dozen Scots. There were 5 Germans. 4 had been born in France, 2 in Canada. There was a Tasmanian. 2 had been born at sea. And then you've got people from Holland, Malta, Switzerland, and I think it's about 26 that I haven't been able to confirm their place of birth as yet. But the bulk of that 26, I believe, were English. Of their previous experience, you've got 49 of them that had previous military experience. 20 of them had previously held commissions either in the British Army or in the militia, which is quite interesting. And there was 1 or 2 of them, I think, were actually ex-Royal Navy as well.
What's your general feeling why so many former officers wanted to come over and be troopers in this obscure police force in South Africa?
Yeah, it's interesting. So whilst I was pondering over this, I read an article, and it was written about 1910, I think possibly a little bit earlier. And it was talking about the men that had gone out to join, not only, it was actually at the time of the article, the Natal Police, they dropped the mounted police in the title, the Cape Mounted Rifles, the Cape Police, British South Africa Police. And they were saying that families used to meet and the black sheep were sent out. They were told that they're to go to the colonies and leave England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, wherever they're from, and to make their way in the world.
Sounds like what happened to me and you.
Yeah, it seems that way, mate, but we won't talk about it. So it was an interesting comment, and I've actually found evidence of one man that was written out of the will. His father was, I think, a reverend, and his grandfather, I think, would have been a member of Parliament from memory. But he was written out of the will, and he did a good job at it in Africa. He made a life for himself. Then you've got some bankrupt cases. Then you've got men that are just genuinely looking for a bit of adventure. I found a comment that somebody had said that their son it was one of the mental fatalities that had gone out. He was an article clerk, and it just wasn't for him in his father's business. He just needed more in his life, and so he thought he'd go out to South Africa. So they've all got their own motive. There's about 33 of them I've identified that are sons of military men, almost all. I think maybe 2 of them were sons of rankers, but the remainder were sons of officers up to general rank. Got 22 that were sons of gentlemen or men of own means. Another 13 sons of clergymen, merchants and manufacturers, the same number. And then the trades, bakers, drapers and tailors, but business owners are 19. Then you've got sons of judges, magistrates, solicitors, another 15, doctors and medical men, civil servants, you've got clerks, secretaries, etc., men that are in customs and excise, a couple of sons of policemen, schoolmasters, politicians and mayors. And there was one whose father was in the royal household. So you're getting an idea of the type of recruits that they were bringing in. So, we're at the stage now where the Natal Mounted Police, we've got these detachments scattered around Natal at the time of January 1879. They've centralised a force at Help-Car. Dartnell, the number fluctuates because men are sent away on errands. There's some issues with horses, etc., and they've moved on. So the number in the field fluctuates, and sometimes it's up to about 120. But at the time when they've crossed the border, they're in their initial action at 12th of January at Soreya's homestead, and they're at Isandlwana shortly afterwards. And at the time when the camp's established, and on the 21st of January, and all this manoeuvring starts to take place where Dartnell goes out on a patrol, he takes 91 men with him of his own police. He leaves behind in camp 34 men, but I actually believe there was a 35th who was a Zulu constable. So they go out on this patrol. He's also got with him 28 Natal Carbineers, Newcastle Mounted Rifles, and Buffalo Border Guard. They're only supposed to be out for a day, and they encounter some Zulus. He decides to stay out there and sends word back to Chelmsford, and Chelmsford follows out the next day on that fateful day of 22nd of January. But back in the camp, of these men that the 34 left back there, of which 25 killed, 9 escaped. So when you look at that memorial, and this is another reason why I like to dig in behind the men, but when you're at Isandlwana and you're looking at the memorial there, it's just the name, Corporal Lally, Lance Corporal Campbell, etc. So looking in behind these men, you can really see the makeup of them and why they fought so hard, and looks their pedigree wouldn't allow them any other course of action. You got Corporal Lally, he was killed there. He was ex-Frontier Mounted Police. His father had served in the ranks of the 45th and settled in Petermaritzburg. So essentially, he was a local lad, but he had some military experience. Hill, his father was a general. He escaped. He'd also had 9th Frontier War experience. Then you've got Corporal Eaton, another chap that escaped. He was also Frontier Mounted Police. His father was a reverend. Berry, that was killed, was a merchant Navy man, also Frontier Mounted Police. Troop Blakeman, Frontier Mounted Police, he's also killed. And then Trooper Cups, he's an interesting one. He was formerly a sergeant in the 75th. So there's not a chance that this guy wasn't going to fight. So often you can hear some comments about colonials, or almost like they're substandard. But when you're looking at this pedigree, a lot of experience there. And, clearly these men, because who their fathers are, are going to stay and fight. And a lot of them did. And you've got Trooper Doig is an interesting one. He escapes, but he was with Durnford in the Natal Mounted at the Langallilla Bailey campaign and was a survivor of Bushman's Pass. Trooper Lloyd was a former lieutenant in the 47th Foot. His father was also a colonel. You watch that, film Zulu Dawn, and you see this fighting in the donga, and there's nameless characters, but that gives you the image of what the fighting would have looked like. And now okay, who were these individual men that were there, and why did they behave like this? Because fundamentally they were policemen, but when they were transferred over to Chelmsford's command, they effectively became soldiers. That was actually an issue that Chelmsford had to press home to the Natal government. You've transferred these people to me now. I will be taking care of them, and they're under my command. The same with the volunteers. Then Rorke's Drift, 23rd of January. Most people have heard of Rorke's Drift, with this dogged defence of one company of the 24th and some odd sods from other regiments who were in hospital. The Natal Mounted Policeman had 3 men in hospital at the time. There was probably the most famous of them all is Trooper Harry Lugg, who was later a colonel in the Natal Forces. He's only a young boy at that stage, 19 years of age. After the attack at Soraya's homestead in 12th of January, he's sent to carry a dispatch back to Peter Maritzburg. And on his return to join number 3 column, it's about 113 miles or something, he does it in 11 hours. His horse stumbles and he injures his knees. He ends up in hospital. But at the time of Rorke's Drift, he's pretty much mobile again and up and running. And there's a Trooper Green, and he had a brother in the regiment as well. And then there's Sydney Hunter. And Sydney Hunter, I mentioned earlier on, both him and Green are laid up with rheumatic fever. But Hunter was an old Frontier Mounted policeman. And interesting enough, it took part in the defence of Ibiza 14 months earlier. So presumably he
against the Posse.
Yep, and presumably he knew John Langley Dalton, the assistant commissariat there at Rorke's Drift, who was also at Ibiza and was mentioned in dispatches. It seems probable with such a small volume of troops at Ibiza at the time that they probably recognised each other. I'd like to think so, but there's no evidence. But it's just too much of a coincidence. They're on the same real estate and in the same mess yet again.
So obviously we've had the Battle of Isandlwana, where a lot of the NMP guys were killed. Then we've had Rorke's Drift, where 3 took part. What happened to the unit after that? Obviously there were still a lot of survivors who'd been out on patrol with Dartnell. What was their progress throughout the rest of the campaign?
Yeah, so immediately following the shock of it all, really, the government, because bearing in mind this is their standing police force, which, and the bulk of the force has been taken away as soldiers. So they're not too keen on the police taking part in the second invasion, which they don't. So they keep them out of it. And they were quite annoyed. They go up to join the 2nd Division, and almost as soon as they arrive, the newly formed 2nd Division, it's about April period, they're pulled out of the division, and they take no part in it. But what they do take part in is several patrols back to Isandlwana. When they're there, there was a German corporal of the NMP, Corporal Alexander Gross, you pronounce his name. He found the colour belt of the 24th there, and Noggs Norris Newman said it was the most interesting object they found then. And then, of course, when they go back in to recover the colours. The NMP aren't there when they find the colours in the river, but they are there at Help Makar on parade when they're marched in. And so Ulundi takes place on the 4th of July. The Zulu army is defeated, and then the pacification operations take place. Now, they do become part of this. And so the evacuations on the 2nd of September, I think it's when Wolseley starts, Chelmsford's left at that stage, Wolseley comes in, and that's when they start to pull the forces out. But they are involved in a operation on the 22nd of September, up around that area, Natombe, the Hermannsburg mission station, and that where they're trying to subdue the remnants of the Aberpalusi. And there was a lot of fugitives up there as well, because it was an area that just wasn't patrolled at the time.
Yeah.
So when Wolseley comes in, he has an escort of Natal Mounted Policemen. That's under a chap by the name of Sub-Inspector Phillips. So he meets Wolseley and takes him in to Help Makar, where Wolseley's reunited with Major Dartnell, who he knew previously, and then obviously they push on with this pursuit of Ketsueo, which was going on at the time. And Wolseley also wants to go and have a look at Isandlwana and Ulundi, and the police are with him as his escort. Phillips and his men, when they're out with Wolseley, they take part in a couple of patrols. They do, as mentioned earlier, the pursuit of the king. They're on one patrol, and they're out when I think it was a Major Hugh McCalmont, I think is the way you pronounce his name. He was a 7th Hussars chap, and he was aide de camp to Wolseley. They locate the 2 missing 7-pounders of the N battery that were taken at Isandlwana, the Royal Artillery Battery. Then, and this is all about August, this is sort of going on, and then the King's finally captured on the 28th of August by Major Richard Martyr, the 1st Dragoon Guards. And at that stage, these police under Phillips are centralised back at Ulundi by the 31st of August, and then a couple of days later, Wolseley decides to pull everybody out of Zulu land. And then there was another group under Inspector Mansell, 38 men who were at Help Makar for a period whilst Ulundi was taking place. And they're sent to join Colonel Baker Creed Russell's flying column. And that's operating up in this area around the Hermannsburg mission station, where they established Fort George. And, they're trying to subdue people like the Induna, Asebi, and who ultimately surrenders. And there's a little bit of skirmishing going on, fighting in caves, etc., trying to bring all these Indunas in that have been holding out. And the Natal Mounted Police are present on the 22nd, where there was a surrender and a cave blown up with dynamite. And then that's pretty much it for them. They do take place take part in the burying of the dead at Shaban and Latombi Drift, which I thought was interesting. So in total, cost to the NMP, 33 fatalities, 25 killed at Isandlwana, 1 at Rorke Drift, 6 died of disease, and 1 committed suicide. But it's interesting with this depletion of numbers, and because of their recruiting model at the time, they requested through the Natal agent in London immediate replacement. I think it was a number of 60 men that they indented for. They did say that men could join in Natal, short service enlistments for 6-month period, but very few actually do, interesting enough. But this draft that comes out, it arrives in June, and those of them that are already experienced, like former military experience, like these men that held commissions, I think in that draft there was about 12 of them that had former commissions. These men are all pushed forward and they join this pacification period, and that they do take part in that. The bulk of them, you could say, were genuine rookies, and rookies was the expression that they used for the recruits then. And these men needed to train up. They did qualify for the South African War Medal without a clasp, so it's probably the easiest campaign medal they were going to earn back in Peter Maritzburg. And interesting enough, there was one individual that was so traumatized about what he had seen at Isandlwana, which many of them were, and some of them did write about it. But there was one chap, Trooper John Field Walker, and he was sent back to England and he was admitted into a mental hospital. And as a result of his Zulu War experiences, and he remained in it until the end of his life. I think he died just before World War II from memory.
Wow.
They moved him to several institutions. And he falls into the blue blood category. All of his brothers had served as army officers or navy officers, and one of them retired. I think the younger brother retired as an admiral.
My word! So he was from some pedigree, but sadly, it seems we think of PTSD as being a modern thing, but I guess that's probably some sort of incarnation of PTSD.
Yep. And there were others, but I can't attribute it to Zulu War experience.
So Zulu War finishes. What happens? Does the NMP just go back to its sort of normal policing role? Does it serve in future conflicts, or does it get wrapped up?
Good point. The Zulu War really put the NMP on the map. It made it a police force of choice to join in South Africa. Now, promotion, because of at this stage, at the end of the Zulu War, the FAMP's been dismantled, the Cape Mounted Rifles was taken over. It's still 9 troops strong with an artillery troop. Promotion is going to be quicker in the CMR. Promotion was not in the NMP. That was the downside of it. But their numbers increase. When the gun war kicks off, that the NMP, they've already got people down on the border, this Harding troop down there, and they've increased the numbers there. And they take part in patrolling on the border during the gun war. They do qualify for the medal later on, but they take part in no fighting. They're essentially stopping the passes. They're trying to stop refugees and raiders from coming into the colony or to control it, cattle theft, etc. Then they take part in the First Anglo-Boer War. They see some action in that. They still emerge with a good reputation. They don't take part as any real set-piece battles as a full unit. They're basically in detachments, because bearing in mind, the colony still needs to be policed. You can't denude it and bring everybody in and centralise them. They take part in that. Then the Second Anglo-Boer War was a big one for what is then the Natal Police. In 1894, the title of mounted is extracted. They still are mounted, but they call them the Natal Police because they end up with a water police as well. And later on, the railway police, part of it comes under them as well. Then the Bambatha Rebellion. And then ultimately, 1910 is, Union of South Africa, and then the military forces and police forces are all restructured, and they become the South African Mounted Rifles.